favorites because it's short and it has some of my favorite topics. My favorite parts about the faith are emphasized. This idea of finding joy even in difficult times. This idea of staying unified and loving and sharing the good news of Christ. And so as Paul is under house arrest in Rome, he's writing this letter back to this church that he has this obvious special place in his heart for. Those people, that group of people that have made a church, he has an affection, kind of like we saw from Pam. She has an affection for that church, those people there, and he's excited about what they're doing and wants to encourage them. You know, there's some correction, but not as much as maybe in some of the other epistles, and I love that. I was thinking about this, though, and this next little chunk, and we're not going to spend a ton of time. When I was a kid, did you ever... This seemed like one of the phrases you'd hear on the playground often. Prove it. Prove it. Right? I have a $20 bill. That was one of my favorites. Man, you were rich. If you had a $20 bill, you were Rockefeller. And we'd be like, you do not have $20. Prove it. And they'd pull it out, and then someone would try and grab it. I realize right now that's like larceny. That should be, that's not great. We would say, we did this all our lives. You know, I'm the third fastest. We knew exactly where everyone ranked in every category in the class. And you go, prove it. And you'd set up and have a very scientific race with some kid at the end, you know, standing and saying who won. It got a little more dangerous the older we got. I remember some friends and I were up at a reservoir, and we were like, someone said, I've jumped off that bridge before, and we're like, prove it. Now, the 16-year-old male ego does not take into account things like spine compression, and all of us jumping off that bridge. And it's one of those things that as the moment you leave the bridge, you think, this was dumb. I did not need to prove this. And we all survived, clearly. I think. Little Jimmy, we never found him. But the rest, that's not true. That's not true. He came up eventually. No, nobody got hurt. I can eat a whole pizza. Prove it. Usually I wouldn't hear prove it. On that one I'd hear, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that checks out. We were all skinny back then and we could pack it away. But that idea that we'd make some statement about ourselves. We'd make some statement, some grandiose thing, and then some snot-nosed kid would say, prove it. And then you're like, oh, can't you just let me have this one? And there's a little bit of that going, maybe not in the snotty-nosed way, but this little passage is a little bit of like, okay, we're saying these things about, Paul's saying these things about the Philippian church and saying the things that, what should happen for a follower of Jesus, a disciple, a believer. And this part is like, okay, so if that's true, if what you say is true, here's how you prove it. Here's how we live like it. And we need to live, what it is living the changes that happen to us. We talk about, this is a theme that I hope you're hearing over the years here, that growth, we talk about growth a lot in the church forever. Growth is change. Growth means we need to be willing to change. Change our mind, change our behavior, change our thinking. And it doesn't stop when we have been a believer for a year. It doesn't stop when we're 30. And the idea that now I know everything, I've studied, I have my opinions. I think sadly that does kind of happen to a lot of us, right? We kind of hit a certain place in life and we're like, from this point on, this is all I'm going to think about everything. It happens, you definitely see it in fashion. About 30 years old, we're like, this is what I'm going to wear for the rest of my life, right? Clearly I've done that. I just replace clothes. I don't buy new fashion, get a new black shirt, right? But we don't want that to be true of our faith. We should always be growing, always be changing, always having an open mind, always hearing new things from God and from others. And as we read the scripture, we need to be willing to grow. That's the definition of growth. And so that's what we talk about. So we need to live changed. Live the change. First point, though, is we want to live like a follower. What does a follower of Jesus really look like? And Paul writes this in verse 2, 12 through 18. Sorry. It's one of those mornings. Dear friends, you always followed my instructions when I was with you. And now that I am away, it is even more important. Work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then, on the day of Christ's return, I will be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. But I will rejoice even if I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God. And I want all of you to share in that joy. Yes, you should rejoice, and I will share in your joy. There's a ton here. I will admit, I'm not going to go into everything. This was a tough little passage. It was tempting to spend 3 weeks on this. There's a lot here, but we're going to kind of look at some overview and some basic principles from it. Change is proven. The way we prove it is we work out the good news, the gospel. I like this idea of saying, prove you're saved. When we think of saved, I think we've changed maybe the meaning of that in the modern era. We have kind of made it all about heaven. Saved is just making sure you're going to heaven. You get across the line. You're saved from hell. But most of the time the context is you're saved from what's going on. There's like legitimate, literal saving, what's going on in the world right now. Your life you're saved from your own living hell now of walking alone or in pain and away from Christ and being part of the crooked and perverse world. That you're saved from having to live that life. Yes, heaven is there, but that wasn't always the focus. That wasn't the point of saved. He's saying, work out your salvation, which working out your salvation, if it was all about heaven, would be just lay there and wait to die. Working out your salvation means, yes, this is the good news. You need to start now. It's also important, just, the tiny words. This is not working for our salvation. Work out your salvation. Right? Work out the good news. We are saved by grace, the grace of God. The thing that makes us joyful as we follow Jesus is knowing that we are loved and we have forgiveness and grace. And that gives me joy. If it was about works, if I had to work for my salvation, there's no joy in that. That is stress, man. That if I have to make sure I'm doing it right all the time to somehow continue over and over to earn this thing that I can never earn, that is a burden. But Paul is saying, no. Live out your... You have been saved by Jesus. Now work hard to live that out. He's like, obey God out of love and respect. This idea of fear of God is a very complex. There's a lot of different ways, and I don't want to oversimplify it. But we don't have to be afraid of God punishing or attacking or anything. We have a respect for God and a fear maybe of the results of not living the way God has called us. But this idea that we obey God out of love. We obey God because He loved us and we love him, out of a motive of pleasing God by living according to the values that God has. And how do we know those values? Jesus. We can't know the infinite, but he is revealed to us, and the guide, the filter, the way to understand all that he's revealed to us is the person, the life, and the teachings of Jesus Christ. We need to have a motive of pleasing God by living according to those values. And I like this, that he's like, hey, I hear when I was with you, you guys were doing great, and I hear that now that I'm not with you, you're still doing great. That is the ultimate thing. There's nothing better as a parent, talk Father's Day, when you get a report from somebody that your kid acted good in their presence. When an employer or a teacher or another parent or a friend was like, hey, your kid's a good kid. Right? That's kind of what Paul's saying, like, yeah, not just when I'm observing. You're following Christ. You're doing the work even when I'm not around. Because it's who you are. You're not Eddie Haskell pasting it on, right? Is that a reference? You guys are all old enough to know that reference. Okay, good. Work with me here. That's had me a little scared, like. Yeah, he knew they were doing well, even if he wasn't there to observe it. And then he says, the reason you're doing well, the reason you're changed is because, you know what? God's changing you. God's doing it. God is doing the work in us and on us. And he's even giving us the desire to grow and change. Not just the ability to grow and change. He will change the way we think, change the way we are to want to be different than we are right now. I love that idea. Not only the will and the power, the desire and the ability. We have all of God working to guide and empower and improve us. I think I have to remember one of the most amazing things about God is that all of him is working in all of us. We don't get a piece of God. We don't get what's left over after he helped important people. We don't get his attention when he's not busy bothering, when he's not busy listening and solving somebody else's problem. We're not bothering him when we come to him. We get all of the power of God to help change us and grow us and empower us. That gives us joy and hope, right? Even when things are difficult. He gives us both the will and the power. But what does that look like? What does that look like? What does it look like? How do we prove we're real followers? We're unified, for one. He says, hey, you're going to stay unified. Be together. Be of one mind. And that starts with, how do we stay unified? I love it. It isn't like, hey, conform and everybody believe the right stuff. It's not like, here's the list of everything that we know who's in and out if they all agree on these points, and everybody does these things exactly the same, then you're unified. No. What does he say? Don't argue and complain. Could you please not? I think that's Paul's tone. Look, quit arguing and complaining. I think it's safe to say that there's way too much arguing and way too much complaining, both in society and in the church today. Right? I will admit, sometimes that's the default, isn't it? How you doing? Well, it's too hot today. How you doing? I went to the grocery store and, didn't like the way Town and Country now has changed everything. If anyone's been to Central Market lately, I have to admit, I have done some complaining. Right? And Paul's like, that's not how we stay unified, is not unified against something. That's usually when we're complaining to somebody, we want them to complain along with us. And we feel there's a little bit of like, oh, hey, we don't like the same thing. We can be friends. Right? No, he's saying, look, stop complaining. The church often, that is how, sadly, that's one way to grow a church. If we complain about the right stuff, all the people who don't like that will come to us. And then arguing. We want to find every tiny disagreement and argue about it. So tempting. So tempting. And not just doctrinal stuff, everything. Politics, economy, the weather, 6-cylinder or 4-cylinder, right? Roma tomatoes or beefsteak tomatoes, or the best fertilizer to use. I'm sorry, I've been around gardeners a lot lately. And, right? Just the desire to kind of nitpick and be right, and we argue. And Paul's like, that's not how you do it. Don't complain about the world. We should need to, the way we prove to the world that we are different and that we're growing, the way we prove, when Paul is saying prove it, he's saying, look, the way to do that is not complain about the world, but serve the world. Don't complain about society, care for it. Don't argue with people to try and argue them into being a follower of Jesus. Love them. And I like this, he's like, no one's going to criticize that. Because we're not arguing. If we don't argue back, do you know how frustrating that is to somebody who wants to argue with you and you don't argue back? I got to admit, I hate that. If I'm going to go down that path, you better fight back. But it is one of the greatest things in the world when someone wants to fight and you kind of refuse, not obnoxiously or anything, just don't engage with it. Right? And what a way to show that we are not part of the problem, that we are people who are following Christ. And he says, be clean, pure, and innocent. Pure and innocent, like children of God. How do we know we're children of God? We're pure and innocent. And this will make us shine. Not perfect, or even our version of perfect. Here's a deadly spiral that we need to, and I think as older Christians, we need to be careful that we don't fall into this. That again, we've figured it all out. We figured it out when we're 30, and now we've got it forever, and I'm right. And pure and innocent and good and following the rules are, I am the standard. My beliefs, my understanding, and my ability to follow the rules is the standard. So, we don't have to be perfect, but you at least have to be good as me. And if you're not as good as me, you're in trouble. Right? If you're better than me, you're putting on airs. Right? I am the golden mean of purity and goodness and innocence. That's not what is talked about here. It's not perfect or even our version of perfect. It's the idea of, hey, you are empowered, right? You're empowered by God. He's helping you walk the right way. And that's going to contrast with this crooked and perverse generation, this crooked and perverse world. The problem, I got to admit sometimes, this is one of those passages that we kind of look at and like, good. We are good. We are pure. We are innocent. And those people outside those doors are crooked and perverse. And we can kind of hold our head up high and look down our nose a little bit. And the problem is, you know who is part of the crooked and perverse? Sometimes is us. Right? Not just overt sin, but even more, the attitudes of pride and hate and power for ourselves. That is the crooked and perverse generation. We want to make it about a list of things that we go, ooh, that's a bad sin, that's a bad sin, that's a bad sin. They're crooked and perverse. But I think what makes this world crooked and perverse is what? Complaining and arguing. Attitudes of pride and anger and hatred. And trying to maximize power for ourselves rather than for God. We get to be a light in the darkness, a bright shining light. You know what is a bright shining light? What happens with a bright shining light? We're drawn to it. I was a camp director for years, and being out in the woods, walking with kids, when you finally see, you're going on a night hike, and you see that light in the distance, the campfire in the distance, you are drawn to it. What is going to draw people in a crooked and perverse generation? Us arguing and complaining, or being a bright light that they are drawn to? Because of Christ in us. And we can offer the forgiveness and love of Jesus Christ. So we hold firm to those teachings, the example of Jesus Christ. We hold on to that. Don't let go. We hold firm to that so that we can help others know him. So we can help others know the love of Jesus Christ. And I think the way to do that people are drawn, I want to say this carefully. I think I was not raised, that's not true. That's not the way it was in my home. But there were people I was around, usually in churches or maybe even in Bible college, where they would say, your friends are your mission field. And I would say, no, my friends are my friends. Just be their friend. Just love people, and then let them see Christ shine through you. People can tell pretty quick when you're recruiting them, rather than when you're loving them. Have them drawn to God. And Paul says, hey, then you do that, you live this way, I will be a proud father. Talks about, if I die, if I'm poured out, there's a whole lot of cool stuff about what a drink offering is. I'm not even going to get into it. But when he says, I'm going to pour myself out, and at the end I'll know, because you did well, that my life wasn't in vain. What a great way to think of life. So we've got to ask, how am I living out my salvation? How am I living out the good news? Do I do it out of the right motive to love God, or is it out of habit or guilt or just optics? I want people to think well of me. Or do I do it because I love Jesus? And then are we bright lights? Do we live like Jesus, following his example, or do we live lives of just following rules and trying to recruit? No, the way, just such great example of these churches that are growing and people who are coming to Christ in Turkey that are making friends and being served, not because, again, we're signing them up for a Amway, but we're trying to love them for Jesus. And they will know Jesus in us, and they will then know Jesus. Not for Jesus. We love them because Jesus loves them, and they will see Jesus in us. So let's start by not arguing and complaining, and love people around us. Befriend them just because Jesus loves them, and let them see Jesus in us. I'm going to wrap it up with this real quick. There's 2 examples of guys who did this. 2 great examples. It's a big long chunk, but I'm not going to talk a lot about it because it kind of explains itself. But the next chapter is about these 2 guys who lived like followers, who were changed. If the Lord Jesus is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon for a visit. Then he can cheer you up then he can cheer me up by telling me how you're getting along. I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about my welfare. No, who genuinely cares about your welfare. And all the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy, he's proved himself. Like a son with his father, he has been serving with me and preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you soon, just as soon as I find out what is going to happen with me here. And I have confidence from the Lord that I myself will come see you soon. Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He is a true brother, a co-worker, and a fellow soldier, and he was your messenger to help me in my time of need. I'm sending him because he has been longing to see you, and he was so very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him and also on me, so that I would not have one sorrow upon another. So I am all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know you will be glad to see him, and then I will not be so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve. For he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death while doing for me what you couldn't do from far away. Two great stories. I'm going to do it very quick. Timothy is the epitome of the second generation disciple, right? He's following Paul around, learning from Paul. He's a student. He's following his mentor. He is learning. And he was on such the same mission, same understanding, same heart as Paul, that in telling and serving and doing the good news, that Timothy being there was just like having Paul there. He could do the same work. And I love that Paul is like, I'm sending him to you because I'm a little worried about you, and you need to be encouraged by hearing how I'm going, and having Timothy there is just as good as seeing me. And I'm hoping, God's telling me I'm probably going to get through this and I'll be able to see you, but I want Timothy there to encourage you. And that happened because they had a deep, intimate involvement. They worked together a long time and they knew each other. For a long time we've had discipleship programs, which is fine. They're great. But accountability teams and discipleship programs are fine, but that's not working together and getting to know each other intimately. You can a little bit, but it's kind of formal. When we really make great friends is when we're sitting around having coffee, when we're doing a project together, when we spend significant times. Quality time is quantity time. And if we really are going to learn from somebody, we need to spend time and be willing to open ourselves. Just like Timothy was willing to open himself to Paul, and Paul was willing to open himself to Timothy, that they were able to train and learn and be of the same heart. And he proved that by sacrificially serving along with Paul. He was like a genuine son. And then Epaphroditus. What a great story. Here's this guy, maybe a leader in the church, maybe just a guy up in the Philippian church, and they send him down there, and what they're doing is they sent money to Paul. He needed cash, because he had to pay for a lot of your stuff. It wasn't like jail here, where you're in house arrest, but you got to pay for all your food and servants and all that stuff. So the Philippian church is like, hey, we'll send Epaphroditus. What does this tell us about him? One, that he was willing to make a long, treacherous journey with a bag of cash, and they trusted him with a bag of cash. I'm picturing something cartoonish, like a bag with a big dollar sign on it, or a drachma sign, or whatever it is that it was there. But they trusted him, and he went down, and he brought this gift, and he says these things about him. He's like a brother. He's close like family. He's become so close to me. He came to serve me and to care for me, and he became like a brother. And he's also a soldier. He fights with me. We're on the same side as we fight, and as we, not again, like we said, in an aggressive way, but the way that we are willing to stand firm for the gospel and try and spread the gospel, expand the good news, upholding the real good news. And he's a worker. He is willing to do the hard work. He's willing to labor with me. And then he got sick and almost died. And word somehow got back to the Philippian church that, hey, Epaphroditus is really sick. He might be dead. And you couldn't just text or FaceTime. However long it took a parchment to get from Rome to Philippi. So by the time you get it, you don't know what's happened in the last 3 weeks or however long it took. And this is why I love Epaphroditus is like, I need to go home. Not because I'm tired and bored here in Rome, or I'm tired of serving you, Paul, or I want to just go home and rest. He's like, you know what, I hear they're worried about me, and I want to show up and walk in and go, hey, look at me, I'm good. God spared me, and I can still serve with you. Caring for others, and all of these examples, caring for others, loving others, always came first. How do we prove our salvation? How do we prove we've changed? We care more and more for others, tangibly and in our words and in our motives. That always is the proof. So ask yourself this, and this is a great route for me to say this. I'm going to turn the camera around sometime. We are not a young church. And I love it. By the way, I had a great conversation with another pastor this week where he's like, yeah, every church conference you go to says you got to get young families and kids. And we love that. We want that. But he's also like, why? There's plenty of old people that need to have a community. Not that I'm calling you old people. Let me rephrase that. There are plenty of mature people. But let me put it this way. Who are you mentoring? Who are you willing to mentor? Is there somebody that you're saying, I want to take you? Maybe it's somebody in your family. Maybe it's somebody in your community, in your neighborhood. But you guys are the ones who need to be doing that. And that takes effort. And that takes time. And that takes listening more than talking. And that takes not being a know-it-all. And that takes, right? But find somebody that you can be intimately involved with to see them grow and for you to grow. And the best way for someone to be willing to change is to see one of us change. You know what is powerful? When you say, you know what? I used to think this and now I think this. You've helped me change my mind. Man, how do we demand others change their whole worldview to follow Christ? Throw out everything they believed before and follow a new way of living, and we won't change how we do communion one time a month. Or we don't like it and we have a different song brought up in the set. We need to show that we're willing to change. So who are you mentoring? Who are you concerned about? And who's mentoring you? Is there somebody that is mentoring you? It doesn't have to be someone older. Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's even somebody younger. But who are you open to feeding into your life to help you change your mind and grow? And not spend our time arguing and complaining, but caring and loving and serving. We'll leave with this conclusion that Paul, the third person in that last chunk, we talk about Timothy, we talk about Epaphroditus, but Paul's the other one there. Kind of behind the scenes. He was also changed kind of drastically on the road from Damascus. He gave all for the real good news of Jesus Christ. That grace that was given to him, he was desperate to give to others. The old Saul was fighting and arguing and complaining, and the new Paul was caring and laying down his life, now willing to lay down his life, and success looked like the Philippian church doing well. So I'll leave you with this benediction. Colossians 1:6. This same good news that came to you is going out all over the world. It is bearing fruit everywhere by changing lives, just as it changed your lives from the day you first heard and understand the truth about God's wonderful grace. May we be people who are changed from the inside out by the power of God through the love of Jesus, and prove this new life by shining as pure lights in the darkness by holding fast to the good news of grace, caring for others, and continuing to change and grow to be more like Jesus. Thank you so much. Happy Father's Day, and have a fantastic day.